Hi, everybody. Welcome to Perfusion Musings. This is a new podcast from Envello Medical where we'll dive into the science of perfusion, oximetry, and the future of cardiovascular care. I'm Casey Bowell. I'm the CEO at Envello Medical.
I'm Dan Rodenhaver. I'm our Chief Commercial Officer.
In the future, we'll be joined by scientists and medical leaders driving real change in our corner of the industry, diving deep into the evolving needs of cardiovascular patients and how new breakthroughs in monitoring technology and early intervention reduce costs, improve recovery, and ultimately save lives. Dan and I met a couple of years ago when I was running a engineering services company. I started focused mostly on soldier survivability, on military medicine. And Dan and I literally passed in a hallway. Someone said, "Oh, hey, you should talk to Dan." And they said he's got experience in military work, he's got experience in medical work, and he knows a lot of the answers to a lot of the questions that you're asking, trying to figure out how to drive these technologies forward. My background is in science. I was a PhD in film optical physicist, and then I worked in IP strategy. And so I really needed Dan to help me figure out how to articulate all the solutions. Dan, why don't you tell us a little more about your background?
Yeah. So when Casey and I met, I was a veteran of the medical device industry. I had worked with a lot of different small companies at various stages of launch of products, worked for some big companies, small companies, my own companies. And I think Casey smartly and his team smartly recognized that they were good at making new technology, but needed to find a way to distill the market down into good product market fit. And they needed somebody with that right skill set. So as Casey said, we bumped into each other in the hallway. It wasn't until a couple of years later that we actually were able to have our timelines sync up, and I came to work for him here.
Yeah, at the time I was being attracted by neurotrauma opportunities, by combat casualty care and hemorrhagic shock opportunities. I was talking to nephrologists, I was talking to sleep physicians, I was talking to pulmonologists, and we were just being pulled in all these different directions. And the technology that we were pursuing is generalizable to a lot of different use cases. And it wasn't until years later when Dan and I realized what we really were measuring here was perfusion, and that perfusion is sort of the reason why animals have hearts and lungs and blood vessels, or mammals at least have hearts and lungs and blood vessels, is to perfuse the tissue. And so once Dan started working with us full time, I asked him to do a market segmentation and understand where else we thought this could be possible. We spent a long time working in neurotrauma because we understand the consequences of poor perfusion in the cerebrovascular space. We still have a lot of interest in supporting that, and then we realized that that could be further generalized to general cardiovascular health. And then the key question becomes, when is perfusion monitoring relevant in the course of cardiovascular disease? Dan, do you want to share anything
Yeah.
about what we've learned in that process?
Yeah, that's what I walked into was like some very enthusiastic founders with some very, very smart people developing technology. And there's a lot of opportunity for perfusion monitoring in lots of things. Like he said, Casey said, is from neurotrauma to sepsis to wound care to lots of things, and even human performance and training for high level athletes. There was a lot of ideas that were being thrown around about what we should do. So I embarked on a market research campaign and spent a long time looking at all those opportunities and just measuring the actual need and the size of the market and the human impact we could have. And it became very, very clear to us that in cardiovascular disease, which measuring tissue perfusion, and particularly microvascular perfusion, is critical. And it's really something we can't do today without new tools. And we may have the perfect solution for something like that. So we're still learning a lot from our cardiovascular disease scientific advisors and a board that we put together and people from all over the market about what that means. And what it turns out is that not everyone knows yet. The tools don't exist to know what we should be measuring, to know if macrovascular improvements and interventions actually get more oxygenated blood to the tissues where it's needed. And we consistently are told over and over again that we need to be able to monitor this type of microvascular perfusion in all patients, wherever they are, not just when they're in the ICU or not just once we know they're sick, but from the first time we see that patient. So it's really exciting to know that we were developing something for one reason, and we found what seems to be nearly a perfect fit. And so this this podcast is going to be about exploring that, about exploring what don't we know, who's interested in knowing this. Not really about what we're doing, but what are we still seeking? What information do we really need to know? So we're going to bring in a lot of people to talk about that because you don't want to hear from Dan and Casey. You want to hear from other people who have really pushing this topic forward.
Yeah, we're really trying to figure out the nuances of exactly where this problem is so we can figure out how to best apply our efforts. We originally thought we'd be most helpful in the remote patient monitoring space. We understand that part of the challenges in getting enough devices out there and part of the benefit of what we're working on is that we have a very scalable system, small, reusable, cleanable system. And so we thought, well, most of the patients are not in the hospital. Most of the patients are outside the hospital. Let's see if we can go there and help them figure out how to improve their care. And we hosted a focus group a little over a year ago, where pretty much every physician unanimously said, don't do that. Please do not go to RPM. We have so many problems in the hospital just knowing who's decompensating when they're already here. And we had the tools and the interventions ready where we can go fix it if we know early enough that things are going wrong. So we actually did pretty much a complete 180. We had originally said we've got these small reusable devices. They're easy to use. They've got two buttons. They're designed functionally originally for military remote patient monitoring. And they said, actually do the opposite thing. Work on the patients when they're coming into the cardiovascular ICU first, eventually RPM, but come in here now so that we can figure out which of these patients are decompensating. And that's really an important aspect of the challenge here. Many patients have degraded perfusion, but you have to find a system that can scalably measure that. Near-infrared spectroscopy tools exist already, photoplasmography tools exist already, but in fact, all of the NIRS boxes now are 10-pound machines that are on racks that have expensive consumables and then are put on the patients very late in the progression of disease. Whereas if we had an earlier, easier to use tool, we could catch the patients before they decompensate and make meaningful interventions.
And so I think what's really interesting is that Casey's right. We pivoted to away from RPM into the ICU, but we have a whole pipeline of products and ideas that could really expand beyond microvascular perfusion. So we're just following the needs and the desires in the market from the clinicians who are helping guide us. And Casey and I have developed a very good partnership here. You can tell that he is a enthusiastic, lifelong learner and futurist, and coming up with new things. And what I add to this is that we're going to find the actual problems to solve, and together we make a really powerful team. We have really powerful technology behind us, but really excited to bring more a new forum to discuss this particular need that we're going to address with the first product launch, which is our Envello core.
Yeah, I think actually one of the most exciting experiences for me in working on this journey of trying to make these new technologies is how open to communicating the physicians are about the problems that they have, about the uncertainties that they have. They're not hiding the problems. They're not ignoring the problems. But we, as the technology developers and deliverers, don't really understand those problems. We don't know what those problems are, but we know what we can do. And so marrying together these experts who are in the real situation where they have to solve this uncertainty, describing the uncertainty that they have in specific and measurable terms, with people like us who can develop not only this first Envello core technology, but a whole host of follow-on technologies to better improve not only perfusion monitoring, but non-invasive hemodynamics monitoring and cerebrovascular function and all these other kinds of projects that are in our pipeline, allows us to have a very clear and open conversation about what are the issues, what do you need to know, when do you really need to know it, how much of it do you really need to know? We're not going to replace the cath lab, but can I tell you 2 hours before you would have otherwise gotten to that part in your medical workflow to say we should go to the cath lab that, hey, maybe we should think about the cath lab sooner. We should consider shock so that we can intervene. And that's actually been a really exciting component of this. It doesn't feel at all like we're pushing technology forward. It feels very much like a whole host of providers are pulling us forward, saying, hey, my problem is like this. How can you help? My problem is like this, which is great. It feels like we are the arrow and they are the bow. And you just point us at the problem and we'll go solve. Yeah, there were two particular instances that really drove us forward into this space where we realized that we could have a very meaningful and we think very immediate impact. One of those is in the development of cardiogenic shock, where patients come in at risk for degraded peripheral perfusion that results in oxygen starvation of the tissue, but with symptoms that are not really specific enough to know that which patient should be prioritized. It's very difficult to objectively identify what pre-shock looks like in a patient. But we know that the consequence of poor perfusion in patients at risk of shock is degradation and physiology. And so we theorized internally that there would be some relevance in cardiogenic shock. And when we brought it to our scientific advisory board, they pulled us forward into the space very quickly. We now have collaborations that we're initiating with a range of universities and companies to explore how we can help better to identify what those patients look like in pre-shock, and also how to help manage and perhaps titrate their interventions so that we know how to manage large bore catheters and how large bore catheters affect the management of patients to shock. Then that relates to not only shock, but also large bore catheters and how large bore catheters can degrade peripheral perfusion, or at least put peripheral perfusion at risk, developing symptoms like acute limb ischemia. And that then opens up a whole host of other applications in perfusion, like
Yeah,
peripheral
like
arterial
for
disease.
example, yeah, peripheral artery disease would be very similar. Well, we can have induced ischemic events with, as Casey said, large bore catheters in interventions, but it may be just developed in the physiology naturally, and so we could have acute limb ischemia um, from peripheral vascular disease in the lower limbs. And this is a very common event with millions of people around the world underdiagnosed because there isn't really an objective way or a way to measure this effectively in the normal clinical workflow, except maybe an ankle brachial index. But could we? But what we really want to know is blood getting to the lower limbs? Well, why don't we just measure that instead of a clunky test that is hard to administer? That sounds a little markety there for me, but this is what we're being told, and so we think there's we're on a progression of an acute need right now in the hospitals that could actually lead to a much more future-looking, farther upstream need. But they're the very similar thing in a very similar set of medical providers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think another cool thing about it is that it's not just like the sedentary stationary testing that we do. It's that our devices generally are conceptualized for real world, real life testing. And so we can do things like exertional ankle brachial indexes. We can look at patients as they're moving about their daily function to have a better understanding of how their cardiovascular state is evolving. That's really the direction we're pushing for in the next couple of years, is how can we build better miniaturized perfusion monitors, but also enable those perfusion monitors to go where the patients go so that we can understand that they're sick before they show up at the hospital. I mean, a lot of these patients have chronic diseases. They shouldn't be coming to the hospital by surprise. We should have tools that are out there able to better manage them so that we can care for them where they want to be, where the providers want them to be, where the insurance companies want them to be. Everybody wants to catch the diseases earlier. So everything Envello Medical is doing, even the creation of this podcast, is to understand and express the importance of perfusion monitoring earlier in the patient journey.
So this is an exciting time for us. I hope everyone will find value in what we're going to put together here. We're not going to stop doing this for many years as long as we have Envello Core with us. So it could evolve into, right, today's subject might be microvascular perfusion. In the future, it might be other type of monitoring and remote monitoring, and that's where we're going. But it really isn't about us. It's about what is required in the market to help. What don't we know? How can we help clinicians treat their patients better, reduce costs, have better outcomes? And so we hope you'll come along on this journey with us and listen as we bring in some of your peers and experts in this field. And we're excited about it. Excited to bring it to you. We haven't done anything like this together before, so it's gonna be a great ride for both of us. And we're looking forward to it and looking to all your input.